UVC radiation is used as a germicidal radiation. It kills all DNA.
And you are metering UVC radiation on the surface now.
Yes.
This is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org. This is the second segment and conclusion to my dialogue with a former NASA contract engineer who has been monitoring UV radiation with state-of-the-art lab equipment supplied by geoengineeringwatch.org. The graphics shown in this presentation depict live readings of deadly UVC radiation on Earth's surface. This frontline data completely refutes the official narrative that no UVC radiation reaches Earth's surface. Earth's ozone layer that would normally shield us from UVC radiation is in the process of collapsing. It has been continuously damaged by countless forms of anthropogenic sources of pollution, the largest among them being the ongoing covert global climate engineering operations. These operations include the spraying of climate engineering elements into the atmosphere and storm systems, and the microwave transmission manipulation of the air masses that are saturated with these elements. The collapsing ozone layer poses an extremely near-term existential threat to all life on the planet. The damage already inflicted is beyond grave. To learn more about this dire situation, please continue listening to part 2 of my discussion with a former NASA contract engineer.
We're already past the point of any return to the planet we've known. Can we still salvage something? Time will tell. How do you feel, based on the lack of willingness of your colleagues, your science colleagues, to acknowledge the severity of this situation?
It's sad. These guys are just after their research projects. You know, they need that funding. They need to pay their bills. They don't want to get caught up in controversy. That's the number one issue. If there's a controversial public issue, they don't want their name mentioned. Nobody wants to make the news. If you want to see how nature does things, you have to study nature. Nature does things perfectly. We have a tendency to screw up everything we touch. And they've touched geoengineering. They've made changes to our atmosphere. The chlorofluorocarbons, yeah, that was an issue, but it was not as great an issue as what they made it out to be about the ozone hole off of Australia and Antarctica.
In many ways, covering the tracks of climate engineering. Would you agree?
Exactly. These people want to control the weather.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
What level of insanity would drive a person to emphatically rant about that with such enthusiasm, as if that could lead anywhere except total planetary omnicide? And that's indeed the path we're on.
That's where we're at. We're almost there. It's not going to be long. You know, my grandkids are not going to have children of their own. That's the long and the short of it, Dane.
But even that is an optimistic timeline, is it not, Ray? I mean, if on the current trajectory, we're facing mathematically, statistically speaking, no functional wildlife populations left on planet Earth by 2026. We've already lost 80 to 90% of Earth's insect populations. The oceans are dying by the day. We've lost 90% of the pelagic fish populations, the food fish in the oceans. And our forests around the world, all of them, without exception, dying. And although some look better than others, again, if they're in the constantly engineered cool-down zone of the eastern U.S., they look better than other regions of the world. And for people that live in those regions, it's profound. I've certainly seen this over and over. If the tree out in front of their house doesn't look that bad, then everything must be fine all over the world. And that's truly a myopic view. If we consider the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48, statistically, that's 1/200th of the Earth's surface area, 1/2 of 1%. And that is hardly a snapshot of the entire world. And there's plenty of problems within those areas, too, for anybody who knows trees. They're succumbing to fungus infections, and that's certainly a part of putting particulates in the atmosphere. It's a platform for fungal proliferation. The soil microbial life is being killed because of these toxins infecting the soils or contaminating the soils. But the bottom line is we're on the fast track to a lifeless planet, and even now, very few see it. And would you say this is the case with your science colleagues, Ray, that they don't seem to be able to see even a few feet in front of them? They're caught up, as you stated, with their pursuit for grants and continued paychecks and pensions, and not seemingly able to consider the fact that we're all perilously close to the end of the road.
Well, and it's even more apparent on how much further they push this down in the news when the COVID takes center stage. I mean, you don't hear anything of the geoengineering going on because of COVID takes center stage. So you know that the media is not giving this information to people. Your organization, Geoengineering Watch, is the single greatest source of information on what's happening in the world with our atmosphere, with the waters, with the Fukushima, everything. But people aren't taking advantage of it. They're planted themselves in front of the television. They go to work, they come home, they have their beer, they drink, they watch their football games, and repeat. They get in their mobile home and they go somewhere. Only some of them go to the places they used to go up in the forest and find out it's not there anymore. The trees are dead.
They are dead. They're dead and dying. And it appears that the climate engineers are yet again setting the stage for massive incinerations in the western U.S. They're cutting off the flow of precipitation. As we've reported at geoengineeringwatch.org, it appears that the boreal forest incinerations or northern latitude forest incinerations are being used to further load the atmosphere with light scattering particulates.
Yes.
That remain in the atmosphere a longer period of time, and the fires burn much hotter, as much as several months. They can rotate the planet several times, and peer-reviewed science study actually advocates for the polar cooling effect of northern latitude forest fires. Is that not complete insanity? Incinerating the Earth's life support systems or facilitating it. And again, the cause of ignition is a secondary subject. Whatever the cause of ignition, the template being set for forest fire incinerations is absolutely a core causal factor of climate engineering. So this is, again, the level of insanity we see with completely interfering with Earth's life support systems. Back to the CV-19 scenario and the disintegrating UV, or the ozone layer, which is releasing immense UV radiation. If there's any positive side to any of this, that UVC radiation is sterilizing for microbial life. We know it's used to sterilize labs. UVC radiation is used for that purpose. And now we have just recently seen an acknowledgement, because they can't hide it any longer from the science community, that being out in the sun kills CV-19 8 times faster than previously stated. How do they miss by that much? Because they're doing their best to hide what they can as long as they can, and when they can no longer hide it, they have to admit to it. And what are they telling the population to do? Stay inside, stay out of the sun. Don't increase your vitamin D levels. And this exposure to this UVC radiation, again, if there's any positive to this, aside from the fact that it's killing the entire planet, it also kills CV-19, and we're not being told about that either, are we?
No. Interesting note on that. CNN had a brief mention of Johns Hopkins University doing studies on UV radiation and the COVID. I think that the blurb was probably 10 seconds long, and then nothing. Okay. Johns Hopkins University found that UVC radiation would basically destroy the DNA, and it was, see, that's the 270 nanometers, from 250 to 280 nanometers is used as a germicidal radiation for hospitals, for surgical instruments, because it kills DNA. It kills all DNA.
And we're getting those spectrums. You are metering UVC radiation within that spectrum range on the surface now.
Yes.
And that's what people need to understand, that this level of radiation, which again is affecting the entire web of life, is on the surface now.
We have a health agency called NIOSH, NIOSH, and they have established radiation protocols for maximum radiation exposure for lab technicians who handle UVC germicidal lamps. They state no more than 0.1 microwatt per hour over an 8-hour period. So the maximum total radiation exposure is 0.8 microwatts after 8 hours. That is an acceptable level. That is the maximum acceptable level.
And where are we at if someone had that much time exposure in the sun today?
Dane, I measured it yesterday. We're at 1.7.
That puts it into context.
Right now, 1.7 microwatts per square centimeter right now, this instant.
Many times above any recognized safe limit, and zero disclosure from any official agency.
Exactly. Now you take 8 hours of exposure, and of course you can't be in the sun for 8 hours. Let's pick half of that. So let's put 4 times 1.7. All of a sudden you've got radiation levels that the higher radiation levels will go to deeper levels in your skin, and that's where typically you go out for 10 minutes and the depth of penetration is on the average of about 3 to 4 millimeters. But the longer you stay, as soon as you feel that stinging is telling you that your skin is being damaged. Okay, if you stay out there and ignore that, from that point on, it's exponential. If you stay out for 10 minutes and another 10 minutes, the damage is going to be 10 times worse. Okay, and that's the part that people don't get. It's an exponential function.
In regard, and this is to our own individual health, in regard to the ability of the planet's life support systems to feed populations, which you alluded to earlier, we are very close to losing our ability to grow food. What we're seeing already, and I just toured some of the agriculture regions in California, and the sun scorch is incredibly evident. In fact, some orchards are being torn out of the ground because the trees are so fried. They're very misshapen. The branches are misshapen. The trees, the leaves themselves are mutated looking. On the perimeter of some of the orchards, I believe almonds in particular, they're spraying a chemical to coat the leaves to try to protect them from this massive UV because the perimeter trees are most exposed. And again, we're seeing a horrific amount of damage on the foliage as a whole. And this is, again, on top of the unprecedented drought that now statistically is the worst in 1,200 years based on paleo data. That's not being admitted to either. This is in addition to the soil contamination from the toxic heavy metals and polymers that are coming down in precipitations, which lab tests prove. This is not speculation. And we know in the case of aluminum that when root systems are exposed to bioavailable aluminum, they shut down nutrient uptake, they die a slow, protracted death. But the bottom line is, even if we looked at the UV issue alone and we ignored everything else, that issue alone is very rapidly diminishing our ability to produce food. Is that correct, Ray?
That's absolutely correct. And what a lot of people don't realize is that most of our oxygen comes from plankton.
Correct.
Okay? And the UVC penetration in the ocean is much deeper than scientists ever imagined. They've measured UVB down to 15 meters, Dane. When that gets into the plankton, and you've seen the reduction in plankton, you've seen the reduction in krill, you've seen our coral reefs, and you more so than the average human, you understand what's happening. They have suffered a death that people just don't get yet. Over 66% of our oxygen comes from plankton. So if we reduce the ability to make oxygen to begin with, plus we're doing the geoengineering to the atmosphere, our ozone layer is not going to last at all. It's going to be gone.
In regard to the die-off of plankton, Ray, that you so accurately describe and the ramifications that are so incredibly grave, we are on the fast track to what would be termed Canfield Ocean, a superheated, oxygenless, lifeless, stratified dead zone in the oceans. Again, that's known as Canfield Ocean. You've communicated to Professor Canfield directly, have you not? And what were the results of those communications?
Professor Canfield has done extensive research in the South Pacific. And because of the Canfield Ocean effects, I wanted to know how much UV radiation metrology they've performed during their research projects. And they do have a person with the research staff that is an expert with that, and they're planning on using more technology to measure and get data in the South Pacific area where his current research project is going on. And I hope to see that, but this is past tense. What we have in the oceans right now is something, no matter what happens to the ozone layer, it can't fix the oceans, Dane.
Yeah, this is where, again, the tunnel vision of those in power that are completely blinded to anything but their quest for power has ignored the consequences of their actions. We see that throughout history. And it's interesting how many people state and how many times I hear that they wouldn't do this to themselves, the proverbial they, those at the top, those who print the money, who own militaries, thus they own countries. They do whatever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. Did they ask our permission to detonate over 2,000 nuclear bombs on planet Earth that contaminated everything, including themselves? They did this to themselves. We have Fukushima, an ongoing triple nuclear volcano meltdown with no known technology to fix it, no end in sight. We have 440 additional nuke plants all over the world. We're building 60 more right now. They don't care or comprehend the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. That's the fact of the matter. And that's where climate engineering fits into the equation. The crown jewel weapon of the military-industrial complex, a weapon by which they can topple countries, bring them to their knees without the populations of those countries ever even knowing they were at war or under assault. And again, no regard for the consequences. I would argue, Ray, based on all the data we do have, that in addition to all the forms of destructive human activity on the planet, that this one issue alone, climate engineering and everything that it entails, again, the ionizing of the atmosphere for over-the-horizon communications, for EMP offense and defense. We have the effort now, it seems, Project Lucy and Project Alamo. Those are acronyms for the incredibly insane effort, it appears, these programs already in operation, to microwave the atmosphere with opposing frequencies in a desperate and unimaginably destructive attempt to degrade the buildup of methane in atmosphere. It's one layer of insanity heaped on top of another, and we are on the fast track to near-term human extinction. And Ray, I want your assessment in summary here, that even optimistically, conservatively, if we remain on the current track and the current rate of ozone destruction continues, again, ozone destruction that is most directly linked to climate engineering operations and all that they entail, the spraying of particulates into the atmosphere causing ozone destruction, the radio frequency microwave transmissions that are used to manipulate these particulates, based on everything we know, again, conservatively, would you estimate that we have less than a decade? And I think that's very conservative. And that doesn't mean business as usual until then. It means that we are on a downhill free fall until that point. But within a decade, if we remain on the current course, life on planet Earth, in most, if not always, may be over.
That's a very conservative estimate, Dane. I'm beginning to wonder if 2025 is realistic. Things are just happening too fast.
On that note, and what you just stated, happening too fast, and Einstein stated this, one of the major folly of mankind is their inability to understand the exponential equation. And that is a key part of this, that just doesn't fit into people's reality. Is that not true? That this equation is so unimaginably non-linear that people simply can't comprehend the exponential factor of how fast the Earth's life support systems are disintegrating.
Exactly. You experienced a situation with the frogs. And that situation happened because there was a hole in the ozone that passed over that area.
Yeah, they were, for those listeners that didn't see that video, it's an Into the Wild video on geoengineeringwatch.org. Saw a very anomalous bullfrog hatch, literally thousands of bullfrogs in a place they weren't normally at. And I monitored those frogs, and over the course of the coming 2 weeks, the sunlight was so intense, they were literally frying on the mud only feet from the water, and that's all on film on the record at geoengineeringwatch.org. And could there have been other factors involved in that equation? Possibly, but nothing that would do that. As far as water contamination or any other source of potentially lethal impact on those frogs, the only factor that there's any validity to or verifiable information on would be the intense UV radiation, which was occurring during that time, and they were literally frying on the beach where they would normally be able to sit, or not on the beach, on a little mud flat where they would have normally been able to sit all day, and they were literally cooking in their tracks.
Exactly. And the sad part is we've created so many ozone holes over the years, starting with the nuclear tests that took place. Those could make ozone holes 1,000 miles wide. And it takes time for the ozone to recombine at altitude.
And people don't realize that. Any rocket launch literally tears a hole in the ozone layer as well, correct?
Exactly. The space shuttle, all of the launches, depending on the size of the rockets, like the Saturn V, that makes an immediate 10-mile wide hole in the ozone layer on its initial launch. And if you can imagine it, it's like you're going through. You remember those old oil lamps? They called them lava lamps. If you could imagine an oil surface, just turning it on and then being penetrated from below and making a hole in that top, and then having the hole expand. Okay, as it continues to destroy the ozone layer. It's kind of a cheap analogy, but I'm trying to give you a visualization over what happens when you disturb the air like that. It's like a fan effect. Once you start the fan up, it continues to expand. Atmospheric physics is the most single complex issue in physics, of particle physics, that exists. China made the fastest computer in the world to study climate engineering. And it's 150 petaflops, phenomenally fast. But that computer still can't do it.
And even with all that in mind, what we have in essence right now is the global climate engineering cabal utilizing the atmosphere for testing all of these processes. They're using the atmosphere for a giant physics lab with unknown consequences. Is that a correct assessment?
Exactly. It's like listening to Lyndon Johnson over and over and over. I mean, when do these people catch on that what they're talking about is total global destruction? When do they catch on to that?
And
there's no place to hide.
There isn't any place to hide. In regard to the ozone layer, it's important for people to understand that is not a uniform depletion, as you just tried to describe. It waxes and wanes, and it is, again, not uniform. So it depends on where you're at, where the particular depletion elements may be, or what other factors, wind currents, cloud cover. But it is not a uniform depletion. But overall, we are losing it rapidly. And without the ozone layer, it's game over on planet Earth. Ray, in summary, what would your warning be to humanity based on all the research you have done? And what would your message be to the climate engineers?
There's only one answer to that, Dane. Stop all geoengineering.
And on time frames, what would your warning be to humanity based on your research? How much time do we have based on the ozone depletion alone, not taking into account all the other factors that are destroying the planet's life support systems, but on the ozone factor alone, what would your warning of a time frame be? And not to pin you into a date, but if we stay in the particular trajectory, and that's the important part of this equation, if we remain in the current trajectory, where does it appear we end up and how soon?
I still think 2025 is a conservative estimate. It could happen before that, Dane.
Because of the non-linear nature of these systems, once they begin to unravel, feedback loops kick in,
yes,
and they become unimaginably exponential, correct?
Exactly.
Ray, speaking on behalf of geoengineeringwatch.org, I'm very grateful for your diligence, your dedication to the whole, the unyielding effort you have made to try to continue monitoring this key core issue of our ability to survive on this planet. It is key to everything. I personally, based on 20 years of research on the geoengineering issue, its ramifications, and the damage to the planet from every other form of human activity. That's important to state because many in the environmental communities feel somehow we're ignoring the rest. We're not ignoring the rest. Not at all. We never have. We're simply stating it's necessary to focus on the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first, where the boat goes down. And I personally am the most concerned about the ozone depletion over anything else. And I'm concerned about everything else. But this takes precedent because it is so core to anything continuing. Again, the planet loses its life support systems, i.e. its cloud-making ability, plankton, forest die-off, microbial die-off. We are on a very short rope on the current course. And I remember the day when I really began to, when I first actually had the experience that drove home how bad the ozone depletion was 20 years ago, operating a D6 cat on the side of a mountain, creating trails for habitat for the native wildlife, open window on the Caterpillar dozer, sun shining against my arm, and it was so intense. And although I knew there was a problem, at that moment I knew the problem was beyond severe. And that's, again, you remember those epiphanies you have along the way. That was 20 years ago. It's gotten unimaginably worse since. I'm extraordinarily grateful to you for your tangible efforts to sound the alarm with credible data, with actual metering. And again, Ray, you're the only one. You are the only one on the planet that is disclosing this kind of metering, and you have dedicated yourself wholly to this task for the good of the human race and the web of life. And I want to extend my personal gratitude to you for that, Ray.
Well, there's no money that can pay me to do this, Dane. I don't take money from anybody for this research because we have to do this. We have to find a way to wake people up.
I feel the same. You know I feel the same. I can't not do this, and I will continue until my last breath. And I know you'll do the same. And Ray, until we connect again, to update again, and we will hope that at that point, somewhere down the road, that the public has understood that we are literally in a very immediate fight for life. And if we can awaken the population to that fact, if we can push the climate engineering insanity to the full light of day, we could cause a shockwave around the world. We could mobilize populations into taking to the streets, if you will, with their proverbial pitchforks and torches and holding legally and morally responsible anyone, everyone involved with these programs, the servicing of these programs, and the covering up of these programs. And that involves all mainstream media, all official weather disseminating sources, which are all owned by power structure entities. We must mobilize global populations into understanding they are fighting for their lives. We need to deal with this issue first and foremost. If we can force this to light and force it to a halt and allow the planet to respond to the damage done, we may at least, at minimum, buy time. And that is an effort worth fighting for.